remember that night as though it was branded into my memory. The way the night sky seemed to swallow everything around me. The emptiness of Route 66 stretching far into the distance. The highway was barren, the kind of place where you can drive for miles without seeing a single car. The headlights of my truck illuminated the dark road ahead, but beyond the reach of the lights, the desert was just black, silent, and endless. It was just another evening on the road for me, another routine haul, another lonely drive to keep the wheels turning. But that night, the desert had something else in store for me. As I cruised down that empty stretch, I noticed something out of place on the shoulder of the road. A figure. At first I thought it was just a mirage, a trick of the heat and the desert's strange ways, but as I got closer, I realized it was a man, standing perfectly still. There was nothing remarkable about him, except for the fact that he was standing out there in the middle of nowhere. Hitchhikers weren't common out here, but it wasn't unheard of either. I pulled the truck over, the engine rumbling to a stop as the man walked slowly toward me. He didn't speak as he climbed into the passenger seat, just silently sat down and stared ahead. His silence didn't strike me as odd at first. People get quiet when they're tired, I thought. But there was something off about the way he looked at me, like he was sizing me up, like he already knew who I was. The first odd thing happened just a few miles down the road. At first I thought it was nothing, a flicker of the truck's headlights, a stutter in the engine. But then it happened again, and again. I kept trying to shake it off, thinking maybe I just needed a break. But something in the back of my mind told me it was more than just a mechanical glitch. The lights flickered, and then the truck started to slow, the engine sputtering like it was gasping for air. I glanced over at my passenger, the hitchhiker. He hadn't moved a muscle. His eyes were fixed forward, his body unnaturally still. There was something about the way he sat that made me uneasy. His eyes, though, that's what got to me. They weren't normal. They glowed, just faintly, but enough for me to notice in the dim light. A faint red glow, almost imperceptible, like embers in a dying fire. I forced myself to look away, telling myself I was just imagining things. The desert does that to people, plays tricks on your mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept driving, trying to ignore the growing tension in the air. The truck continued to sputter, the headlights flickering in and out of focus. Then, as I rounded a bend, I saw it. A decaying gas station off to the side of the road. It looked abandoned, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a ghost town. Rusted pumps, cracked windows, and the faintest hint of something moving behind the boarded-up doors. It wasn't a place anyone should stop, and yet, for some reason, I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. "Are you sure we should stop?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But the hitchhiker didn't respond. His face was as cold as stone, and his eyes never left the road ahead. And that's when I noticed it. The air had grown cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. I couldn't explain it. The temperature had dropped so quickly it felt unnatural, like the desert was holding its breath. As we passed the gas station, my unease began to turn into something else, something darker. There was a shift in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere that I couldn't ignore. The road ahead seemed to stretch even longer, and the silence in the truck grew louder, if that was even possible. The flickering lights had become more frequent, almost as if the truck was being pulled into something. But then it was the shadows that caught my attention. I saw something, a figure, moving across the road just ahead. It wasn't a person. It was more like a silhouette, something shifting in and out of the darkness. It was too tall, too thin to be a human. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the hitchhiker didn't blink. His eyes, those glowing red eyes, followed the shadow with a kind of recognition that made my skin crawl. "Who is that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The hitchhiker didn't respond. Instead, he muttered, "Don't look back." His voice was low, almost soothing, but there was something about it that chilled me to the bone. I couldn't help myself, though. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the shadow still following us. But the road behind was empty. Nothing. The darkness of the desert stretched behind me, as vast and silent as ever. I should have kept my eyes on the road, but something about the hitchhiker made it impossible to ignore what was happening. I kept driving, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. But the longer I drove, the more I realized that whatever was going on was bigger than me. It was like I had stepped into something I didn't understand, something far beyond the mundane world I knew. The truck jolted and I slammed my foot on the brake, bringing it to a screeching halt. My heart raced in my chest, and I glanced over at the hitchhiker. He was gone, vanished, like smoke in the wind. 1 second, he was sitting there, his eyes glowing red, and the next, nothing, just empty space. The seat beside me was cold, and the air in the truck felt thick, heavy, suffocating. I slammed the truck into park and scanned the empty desert around me. The only sound was the wind, a mournful howl through the empty expanse. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I had just seen. I couldn't understand it. How could he have disappeared so suddenly? Was it some trick of the light? Or had I really just seen something I couldn't explain? The gas station loomed in the distance, its broken windows and rusted signs barely visible in the faint moonlight. It was the only thing that felt real in this strange, distorted moment. I needed to go back. I had to find him. Maybe he was playing some sick joke, or maybe he had just gotten out and walked off. But as I turned the truck around, the unease gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened, whatever I had seen, wasn't just a random event. I reached the gas station, the headlights cutting through the darkness, but there was no sign of the hitchhiker, no sign of anyone. Just an empty, decaying structure, and the oppressive silence that hung in the air. The wind kicked up dust, swirling it around in eerie patterns. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. I got out of the truck feeling like a fool. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the isolation of the desert had finally gotten to me. But then, as I stood there in the eerie stillness, I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. I froze. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was my name. My name. I whipped around, searching the darkness, and there, standing near the old gas pumps, was the hitchhiker. His glowing red eyes pierced the dark like a beacon, and behind him, something else moved. Something tall and twisted, like a shadow cast by something far beyond human understanding. It was no longer just the hitchhiker. He was a part of something older, something waiting. "You thought you could run," he said, his voice colder than the night air, "but you can never escape." My heart skipped a beat as the realization hit me. This wasn't just a random encounter. The hitchhiker, he wasn't human. He was part of something far more sinister, something tied to this land, to this cursed road. The figure behind him, the shadow that was no longer just a shadow, was waiting for me too. Waiting for me to step into its grasp. I didn't know what to do. I could feel the weight of the desert pressing in on me, like it was closing in from all sides. The hitchhiker's smile grew wider, his eyes glowing brighter. He didn't need to speak anymore. I knew what was happening. The engine roared to life as I slammed my foot down on the gas. The truck shot forward, speeding through the desert, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not for me, not for anyone. As I drove, the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, and in the rearview mirror, I saw nothing but the desert. No sign of the hitchhiker, no figure, just the blackness of the night. But I knew one thing. this wasn't the end. It was just another routine delivery, the kind where your mind wanders, and the road becomes nothing but a blur of asphalt and headlights cutting through the thick, suffocating fog. The night was eerily quiet, not a soul in sight, and the silence seemed almost unnatural. I was driving alone, my truck humming along the deserted highway, with nothing more on my mind than getting the job done. The moon was hidden behind a blanket of clouds, casting only a faint glow on the road ahead. As I approached an old, run-down motel, I couldn't help but glance at it, a faded neon sign flickering weakly in the mist. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. There was something oddly unsettling about it, a strange aura that clung to the place like a curse, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I had driven past this motel countless times before, but tonight it felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I shrugged it off, trying to ignore the unease creeping into my chest. But as I neared the motel, I saw him, standing by the entrance, his face pale and twisted, as if he was carved from the fog itself. I slowed the truck to a crawl, not sure if he needed help, or if he was just another transient lost in the night. But when I came to a complete stop, he raised his hand. I thought he was signaling for me to pull over, but in that split second, something strange happened. He vanished. I looked frantically, trying to find him, but the fog had swallowed him whole. I was left sitting in my truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I had seen something, but what? I told myself it was nothing, a figment of my imagination, maybe just the isolation of the night getting to me. I thought about continuing on my way, finishing the delivery, but something tugged at me. I had to know more. So I decided to stop inside the motel. Maybe the clerk had seen him. Maybe there was an explanation. I pulled into the parking lot, the sound of my tires crunching on the gravel breaking the silence. The motel looked even more decrepit up close, the paint peeling from the walls and the windows dark, save for one flickering light. I stepped out of the truck, my boots echoing in the stillness as I made my way to the lobby. The door creaked as I entered, and a musty, stale odor hit me like a wave. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed, casting an eerie glow on the lobby. The clerk behind the counter didn't look up at first. He was reading an old newspaper, his face lined with years of exhaustion. When he finally noticed me, he didn't smile. His eyes were tired, weary, as if he had seen more than his fair share of strange things over the years. I tried to keep things casual. "Hey, I saw a guy standing outside by the entrance earlier. I was wondering if he's a guest here," I asked, trying to sound normal. The clerk's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. His eyes narrowed, and he set his paper down slowly, as if considering whether or not to say something. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "You mean the man who died here?" he asked, his voice carrying an unsettling weight. I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean, died here?" The clerk leaned in, glancing nervously around the room as though someone might overhear. "There was an accident, a trucker years ago. Came through here one night. His truck went off the road, right near the motel. He died instantly, they say. They never found the cause of the crash, just that he died in that spot. The locals say he still roams these parts, some nights. You can hear his truck roaring down the road, but no one ever sees him. Are you sure you saw someone?" A chill ran down my spine. The idea of someone dying in such a violent way, and then returning as some kind of ghostly presence, didn't sit well with me. But it also didn't feel like just a rumor. There was something about the way the clerk said it, his tone, his hesitation, that made me believe he wasn't just passing on a local myth. There was truth in his words. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping over me and left the motel, But the thought of that man, and the way the clerk spoke about him, wouldn't leave my mind. For days after that encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about the motel and the ghostly trucker the clerk had mentioned. I kept telling myself that it was just a strange story, nothing more. But the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had to know more. The mystery, the unanswered questions. It ate at me. I began making excuses to drive down that stretch of road, passing the motel over and over again. Each time, the place seemed even more oppressive. The fog, which had been thick the night I first saw the man, now lingered during the day. The air felt damp, heavy, and the trees surrounding the motel appeared twisted, as if they too were weighed down by some unseen force. I started asking around, speaking to locals in nearby towns. The more people I spoke to, the more I heard about the place. Some said the motel was built on cursed land, that the land itself had a dark history, one that had claimed many lives over the years. Others spoke of strange occurrences, whispers in the night, flickering lights, and the sound of a truck engine roaring down the road when there was no truck to be seen. The stories kept piling up. And then, one day, I found something buried in the local library's archives, an old article from a newspaper detailing the trucker's death. But there was more to it. The article mentioned that the trucker wasn't the only one to die on that stretch of road. In fact, over the years, several people had mysteriously disappeared or died in accidents near the motel. Some of them were truckers like the man, while others were just passing through, but all of them had one thing in common. They had been there, near the motel, just before they died. The deeper I dug, the more questions I had, and with each new piece of information, the weight of the mystery grew heavier, and the sense of unease deepened. Something was pulling me toward that place, and I couldn't fight it. The more I learned, the more I became obsessed with uncovering the truth. I had to know what was happening there. It wasn't until one cold, foggy evening that everything came to a head. I was making my usual rounds, heading back toward the motel. The night was dark, the fog thick as ever. As I neared the place, I saw him again, the man, standing in the same spot, near the entrance of the motel. This time, however, there was no mistaking it. His face was as pale as before, twisted with what looked like agony, frozen in the same expression of pain. I pulled the truck over, my heart racing. I couldn't believe it. This couldn't be real. But there he was, standing still in the fog, staring at me with hollow, vacant eyes. I thought about driving away, but something made me stop. The man raised his hand, motioning for me to stop the truck. I did, but the moment I hit the brakes, he disappeared, just like before. I scrambled out of the truck, my pulse pounding in my ears. The fog seemed to close in around me, thickening, swallowing the world whole. I looked around, but there was no sign of him. No footprints in the gravel. Nothing. Just that strange, oppressive silence. And then I heard it, the roar of a truck engine in the distance. My stomach dropped. The sound grew louder, closer, like it was heading straight for me. I turned around, expecting to see headlights, but there was nothing. Nothing but the howling wind and the fog, so thick I could barely see my own hand in front of me. But the sound, the engine, it was real, it was deafening. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. Silence again. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unsure of what I'd just experienced. My mind raced. Was it a trucker's ghost? Was it real? Had I lost my mind? I turned and bolted back into the motel, desperate for answers. I ran inside, breathless, and the clerk, who had been replaced by someone else, looked at me with confusion when I asked about the man. They had no idea who I was talking about, no memory of any trucker or ghost. I checked my delivery log, and that's when I realized something I hadn't before. The route I had been given, the one that led me to the motel, wasn't on my list. The motel wasn't even supposed to be part of my delivery route. I had been drawn there for a reason. But what did that mean? Why had the route been changed? Who had set it up? And why was I the one who had been sent there? As the days went by, the feeling that something wasn't right only grew stronger. I kept hearing that truck engine, even when I was miles away from the motel. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, a warning. But what was it warning me about? I eventually realized the truth. The trucker hadn't just died in that crash. He had died because of something else. A curse, maybe. Something darker. And now I was part of it. I had become tangled in the same web of tragedy and death that had claimed